Waitress accepts fake marriage. Out of desperate debt, unexpectedly saves a billionaire's life. When the papers were signed, she could barely hold the pen. Her hand trembled, her eyes stung, and her heart felt as though she had sold it along with her name. Across the table sat the man who would become her husband, on paper. His gaze was cold, his posture unshakable, and his suit so perfect that it made the world around him seem cheaper. He didn't smile when the lawyer said, "Congratulations." Neither did she. That was the first time Amelia Ward realized that some vows are made not from love, but from survival. Before this moment, she had been a waitress in a downtown cafe that smelled of burnt espresso and rain-soaked coats. She was 27, barely making rent, and carrying a debt her late father had left behind like a ghost that wouldn't stop whispering. She didn't complain. She smiled through every order, every rude customer. Every day she couldn't afford a second meal. And that was how Alexander Kane noticed her. He had come into the cafe one evening, not out of hunger but habit. Billionaires rarely eat where the ordinary do, but Alexander had a strange fascination with things that didn't need to impress him. He sat in the corner booth, his phone in one hand, a storm in his eyes that even money couldn't quiet. "Coffee, Black?" she had asked. He looked up, and for a moment his world stilled. "Yes," he said simply. Strong, that was all. No flirtation, no smile, no kindness. Just a man whose words carried more weight than the sound itself. She served him without knowing that his empire was falling apart in secret. A lawsuit, a corporate betrayal, and the kind of scandal that eats reputations alive. He watched her through the reflection of the cafe window. She spoke gently to an elderly customer, remembered names, offered smiles that didn't look practiced. She was everything he wasn't, kind without reason, strong without pride. That night when she left, she didn't see the black car following her home. "Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people," the narrator's voice would have whispered, just as Amelia's life began to turn in a direction she couldn't yet see. The next morning, a man in a suit waited at her door. "Miss Ward," he said, handing her an envelope. "Mr. Kane requests your presence." She frowned. "Mr. Who?" But when she opened the letter, formal, emotionless, sealed with a silver emblem, it offered something impossible, a proposal, not romantic, not even personal, a business arrangement. She was to marry Alexander Kane, CEO of Kane Global Holdings, for 6 months. In return, he would pay off her debt, every cent. At first, she laughed. "Is this a joke?" But when she called the number at the bottom, a deep voice answered, "It's not." She froze. "Why me?" "Because," he said, "you're honest. And I need someone who doesn't want my money. Just a chance to survive." The line went dead. She sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the letter, her father's debt notices scattered beside her like accusations. Her conscience screamed no. Her reality whispered yes. By the end of the week, she was in his office, a world of glass and shadow overlooking the city. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, wearing indifference like armor. "You read the terms?" he asked. "I did," she replied. "But I still don't understand. Why marriage?" He turned, his eyes sharp but unreadable. "My board requires stability, a family image. It keeps investors calm. A fiancé isn't enough. It has to look real." "And afterward?" she asked. "We divorce quietly, you walk away free. Just like that?" He nodded. "Just like that." She searched his face for humanity, found none. "And if I say no?" He didn't flinch. "Then the debt stays." For a moment she wanted to slap him. Not because he was cruel, but because he was so calm about it. As if he'd already bought her soul and this was just the receipt. But she also knew what her father's hospital bills had done to her life. The nights of choosing between heat and food. The phone calls from collectors that turned into threats. So she asked the question she thought she'd never ask any man. "When do we start?" 2 days later, the city's gossip columns exploded. A reclusive billionaire Alexander Kane engaged to unknown woman. Photographs flooded the internet. Her pale dress, his cold stare, the two of them standing side by side like a contradiction that shouldn't exist. His world called her an opportunist. Hers called him a monster. Neither of them was right. The wedding was small, silent, mechanical, sterile. No family, no friends, just lawyers and cameras. He didn't touch her hand, except when the vows required it. "I, Alexander Kane, take you, Amelia Ward." The words fell like stones into the room. When she repeated them, her voice broke. And in that break, in that trembling sound of a woman saying yes to a life she didn't choose, Something shifted behind his eyes. Just a flicker. A shadow of empathy he didn't know he still had. After the ceremony, they stood outside as rain began to fall. She looked at him, searching for any trace of the man behind the contract. "Do you always buy what you want this way?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, expression unreadable. "I don't buy people. Could have fooled me." He turned away, but her words followed him, sharper than the rain, softer than he wanted to admit. Later that night, he poured himself a drink in the silence of his penthouse. For years he had been surrounded by power, money, beauty, yet none of it had ever made him feel smaller than the woman now sleeping in the guest room with tears on her pillow. He didn't know it yet, but she would be the one to save his life, not from bullets or illness, but from himself. Because sometimes the greatest rescues don't happen in grand moments. They happen in the quiet decision of someone who should have walked away, but didn't. And somewhere in the dark, Amelia whispered to herself, 6 months. I just have to survive 6 months. But she had no idea that survival wasn't what fate had planned. It had planned transformation. And in that plan, neither of them would ever be the same again. The mansion stood at the edge of the city, surrounded by glass walls and silence. It wasn't a home, it was an empire of loneliness. Every surface gleamed, every light was perfectly placed, yet it all felt lifeless. Amelia stood in the center of it, suitcase in hand, looking like a misplaced fragment of humanity in a place designed for machines. Alexander watched her from the staircase. He had expected her to look impressed, even intimidated. Instead, she looked sad. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said quietly. "And emptier too." He frowned. "You'll get used to it." "I hope not." The simplicity of her words disarmed him. He wasn't used to honesty. In his world, people said what they thought would benefit them. Amelia said what was true, even when it didn't serve her. A housekeeper appeared beside her. "Mrs. Kane, your room—" "Miss Ward," she corrected gently. The woman looked between them awkwardly until Alexander interrupted. "That won't be necessary. She'll be in the guest wing." Amelia nodded, clutching her bag. "That's fine." Their eyes met, his cold, hers tired. For a moment, he almost said something else, but the habit of control won. "Dinner's at 7, he said, turning away. "Don't be late." Dinner was an exercise in silence. She sat across from him at a table meant for 20, a gulf of marble and formality separating them. He ate mechanically, like a man completing a chore. She picked at her food, her mind already counting the days, 180. "Is it always like this?" she asked finally. He didn't look up. "Like what?" "This quiet. It's peaceful. It's suffocating." That made him glance up. Her tone wasn't defiant, just honest. "You don't like silence?" "I like silence," she said softly. "Just not the kind that feels lonely." He didn't reply, but for the first time his fork stopped moving. After dinner, he returned to his study, a dark space filled with old books and newer regrets. Through the glass wall, he saw her walking alone in the garden, barefoot, laughing softly as she leaned toward the roses. He didn't know why, but it bothered him. People weren't supposed to smile in this house. It had forgotten how. The next morning, Amelia woke to find a note slipped under her door. "Be ready by 10. We have an appointment." She frowned. She hadn't asked for one. At 10 sharp, a black car waited outside. He was already in it, eyes on his phone. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To make it official," he said, without looking at her. The ride was quiet, the city sliding by like a memory neither of them wanted to revisit. They stopped at a courthouse, not for marriage, but for proof of it. Photos, signatures, documents, everything perfectly orchestrated to appear real. He handed her a diamond ring before they stepped out. "Wear this." She hesitated. "It's heavy." "It's expensive," he corrected. "That too," she murmured, slipping it on. In the photographs, he held her hand as if she were glass, fragile, necessary, distant. She smiled for the camera, but not for him. When it was done, they walked outside into the harsh light of the afternoon. The city buzzed with life around them, but they stood apart from it, two actors in a play that no one else knew was fiction. In the following weeks, Amelia adjusted to her strange new life. Her days were quiet, morning walks through rooms too grand for comfort, polite conversations with staff who didn't meet her eyes, endless photo opportunities for magazines pretending to love her story. Alexander was rarely home. He spent long hours at his office fighting invisible wars, but at night, when she heard the soft sound of his footsteps in the hall, something inside her stirred. Curiosity, pity, maybe something more dangerous. Once, she found him asleep in his study, a glass of whiskey beside his hand. the light from the fireplace tracing shadows across his face. He looked younger, softer, almost human. She covered him with a blanket and turned to leave. "Amelia," he murmured, half awake. She froze. "Yes? Why did you really say yes?" She hesitated. "Because I didn't have another choice." He opened his eyes slightly. "There's always a choice." "Not when survival is the price," she said quietly. He didn't answer. But long after she left, her words echoed in his mind. One evening, a charity gala required their presence. It was their first public event together as husband and wife. The photographers swarmed them the moment they arrived. Flashes, smiles, whispers. She wore a simple black dress he'd chosen for her. It wasn't her style, but when she walked in beside him, every head turned. "You look—" He stopped himself. Compliments weren't part of his vocabulary. She smiled faintly, like someone pretending to belong. He almost smiled back. "Then you're convincing." They moved through the crowd like two ghosts haunting the same story. He introduced her to people who measured her worth by her last name, and she greeted them with grace that disarmed their judgment. But as the evening went on, she noticed something else: the fatigue behind his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. Every handshake seemed to cost him something. Every polite smile was an act of war. When a business rival approached him, a man named Dalton Reese, younger and arrogant, the air shifted. "Alexander," Dalton said, his tone dripping with false charm. "You never told us your new wife was so grounded." Alexander's jaw tightened. "She's exactly who I needed," Dalton smirked. "Temporary arrangements often feel that way." Amelia sensed the insult before the words were even finished. She stepped forward, meeting Dalton's gaze. "Funny," she said evenly. "I thought confidence was supposed to make a man polite." The smile vanished from his face. Alexander's eyes flicked toward her, not with anger, but something closer to admiration. "Excuse us," he said, leading her away. Once they were out of earshot, she sighed. "Sorry, I probably made that worse." He shook his head. "You made it better." She blinked. "Really?" He looked at her, and for the first time, his voice softened. "You reminded them I'm still human." Their eyes met, brief, electric, and real. But before either could speak again, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and the warmth vanished. He turned away, muttering, "Work." Amelia watched him walk into the shadows of the ballroom, feeling something inside her twist, the ache of wanting to reach someone who didn't know how to be reached. And as the music swelled, she stood alone beneath the chandelier, realizing something she didn't want to admit. The man she had agreed to marry to save her life was slowly becoming the one who could break it. The next morning began like every other in Alexander's world, early, silent, controlled. He worked before sunrise, his mind locked in calculations and meetings. But that morning his thoughts weren't on the market or the lawsuits. They were on the woman asleep down the hall. Amelia had no idea that her presence had changed the air in his house. The staff moved differently now. There was laughter in the kitchen, a softness in the rooms that hadn't existed in years. Even his assistant had noticed. "You seem different," she'd said during a meeting. He had denied it, of course. But deep down he knew something was shifting. Later that afternoon, when he returned home, he found Amelia in the library. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open books, a faint smile on her face. She looked up when she heard him. "Is this allowed?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Those are first editions worth more than your old apartment," he replied dryly. "Then they deserve to be read," she said, "not just displayed." He stared at her for a long moment. "You're strange." "Honest," she corrected, and for a second he almost smiled. She had that effect. She didn't try to charm him. She simply existed with quiet confidence. "Why do you read so much?" he asked. "Because books don't judge. They just listen." He hesitated, then sat across from her. "And what are you listening for?" Her gaze softened. "Hope, I think." He didn't know what to say. It had been a long time since anyone around him talked about hope without irony or strategy. When she noticed his silence, she added, "You look like someone who stopped believing in it." He looked away. "Belief doesn't pay debts." "No," she said gently, "but it makes surviving mean something." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, fragile, unfamiliar, but undeniable. That evening a storm rolled in. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the wind howled against the glass walls of the mansion. Amelia couldn't sleep. She wandered into the kitchen to make tea, her bare feet soft against the marble floor. She didn't expect to find him there, standing by the window, tie undone, drink in hand, staring into the rain. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked. He turned, surprised. You don't either. Storms make me uneasy, she admitted. They make me calm. She smiled faintly. You would say that. He poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. For a man who commanded companies, the gesture felt strangely intimate. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he replied automatically. Why not? Because I didn't earn it. Her brow furrowed. You don't have to earn kindness, Alexander. He looked at her, really looked at her. Maybe you don't, but I do. The words slipped out before he could stop them, heavy with the weight of everything he'd lost. Trust, peace, forgiveness. She studied him quietly. You talk like a man who's already been punished. Maybe I have. They stood there in silence, the storm raging outside, two souls both hiding from the same kind of pain, loneliness disguised as control. When lightning lit the room, she saw it clearly. The exhaustion in his eyes, the sadness behind his power. For the first time, she felt something deeper than curiosity. Compassion. He noticed it too, and it terrified him. The next day, the tabloids erupted again. Someone had leaked photos from the gala. The headlines were cruel. The Billionaire's charity case, Waitress wife or PR move. Amelia sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through the comments. Words cut deeper than knives. Alexander walked in, phone in hand, face tense. He saw the screen and froze. Don't read those, he said sharply. I already did. They're parasites. They don't matter. They matter to me, she said, her voice trembling. I never asked to be famous. I never asked to be your shield. He rubbed his temple. I'll handle it. Handle it, she repeated. By paying them off? By pretending it's all fine? It is fine. No, it isn't, she said, standing now. You might not care what people think of you, but I still have to live with their words. He stared at her. The defiance, the hurt, the strength. She wasn't fragile like the people in his world. She was human, and that made her infinitely stronger. I can make this disappear, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, you can't. You can erase headlines, not pain. He wanted to argue, but the truth in her voice stopped him. She walked past him, her shoulders trembling. Sometimes I think you don't even see people, Alexander. You only see problems to solve. Her words lingered long after she left the room. That night, he sat alone in his office, the glow of the city reflecting in the glass. He thought of her, of the way her honesty cut through his walls, of the storm in her voice when she refused to be bought. For years, he'd surrounded himself with people who said yes to everything. Amelia was the first to tell him no, and mean it. He didn't know it yet, but that refusal would change everything. Because for the first time in his carefully constructed life, Alexander Kane wasn't sure who was saving whom. The next morning, Amelia didn't join him for breakfast. The table, long enough to seat 20, felt even more hollow than usual. The untouched cup of coffee across from him mocked him in silence. For a man who lived by control, the absence of one person shouldn't have mattered, but somehow it did. He asked the housekeeper where she was. She left early, sir. Said she needed some air. Air? He almost smiled. Of course she did. Still, something unsettled him. He told himself it was about appearances, that his wife wandering alone could create rumors, but deep down he knew that wasn't the reason. He grabbed his coat and went after her. He found her by the pier behind the property, sitting on a wooden bench that overlooked the river. Her hair moved gently with the wind, and in her lap rested a small notepad. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said, his voice softer than usual. She didn't turn. I'm fine. Reporters might follow. Let them, she said. They'll find a woman trying to remember who she was before she signed her life away. He walked closer, standing beside the bench. I didn't take your life, Amelia. She looked up at him. Then what do you call this? He had no answer. She closed her notebook. You built a world where no one tells you the truth, and now you've trapped me inside it. He met her eyes that saw through every layer of him, every scar he thought he'd buried. You think I like this? I think you don't know what you like anymore. That cut deeper than she knew. Later that evening, when she came inside, she found the lights dimmed in the living room. A single lamp burned beside the fireplace. He was sitting there, no jacket, no tie, sleeves rolled up, a drink untouched beside him. Amelia, he said as she hesitated at the doorway. Sit. She did, cautiously. I'm not good at this, he began. Talking, explaining. I've noticed. He ignored the jab. You asked what I call this. I call it survival. For you or for me? For both of us. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. When I asked you to marry me, I didn't think about what it... The following days unfolded like a fragile truce between two worlds. The mansion that once echoed with emptiness now carried the faint sound of footsteps, of presence, of something alive again. Alexander and Amelia moved around each other cautiously, orbiting like two stars that couldn't decide whether to collide or stay apart. Their conversations were few, but every word carried weight. Every silence seemed to say what they were both afraid to. One night, Amelia found him sitting at the piano in the great hall, a place she had never seen him go before. The soft notes drifted through the air, slow, hesitant, haunting. She stood in the doorway, her voice low. "I didn't know you played." He didn't look at her. "I used to." "Why did you stop?" He paused, fingers still on the keys. "Because the last time I played, someone I loved walked out of the room and never came back." Amelia stepped closer, the flicker of candlelight brushing against her face. "Then maybe it's time to play for someone who stays." That made him look up. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the man behind the armor, a man who had loved deeply once and had been punished for it. He rose slowly from the bench, every movement controlled but heavy with something he no longer wanted to hide. "You talk as if staying is easy." "It isn't," she said, "but sometimes it's worth it." Her honesty caught him off guard again. He turned away, staring at the grand windows that overlooked the city. "You have a way of making everything sound simple." "I just see things the way they are," she replied. "You see things the way you've been hurt." The words sank deep. He didn't respond, but she could see the battle behind his silence. That night, long after she'd gone to her room, he sat back at the piano and played the same melody again, this time softer, freer, as if testing what hope sounded like after years of silence. The next morning, she found a cup of tea waiting for her at the breakfast table, perfectly brewed, with a note beside it that simply said, "Thank you for listening." She smiled, touched the rim of the cup and whispered to herself, "You're welcome." As days passed, their routines began to overlap. He started coming home earlier, sometimes joining her for dinner, other times asking her opinion on things he never would have before. She laughed once when he handed her a stack of business proposals. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you don't tell me what I want to hear," he said. "You tell me what I need to." She spent hours reading them, making notes in the margins, and when she handed them back, she added with a teasing smile, "Your team won't like my honesty." "They never do," he said, but there was pride in his tone. One evening, after another long day, he walked into the kitchen to find her cooking. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the air. She looked up from the stove, wearing his oversized shirt instead of one of her own. "Are you cooking?" he asked, almost amused. "I was hungry," she said, "and I figured rich men have to eat too." He leaned against the counter, watching her move with quiet focus. "You're full of surprises." "Good," she said, glancing at him with a small smile. "You need some." He laughed softly, a sound that startled even him. "I haven't laughed in years. Then I'm glad I was here when it happened." They ate together that night at the kitchen counter, not the grand dining table. The atmosphere was warm, simple, almost domestic. She told stories from the cafe, about regular customers, small moments, real people. He listened, really listened, as if he'd forgotten what everyday life sounded like. After dinner, she leaned back in her chair. "You know," she said, "you're not as cold as you pretend to be." He looked at her, his expression unreadable but his eyes unguarded. "And you're not as fearless as you act." Their words lingered in the air. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she stood and began clearing the plates, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. Later that night, she lay awake thinking about him, the contradictions, the quiet moments, the way his gaze seemed to hold things he'd never say aloud. He wasn't just the man who'd bought her freedom, he was the man trying to remember what being free felt like. Across the hall, Alexander sat at his desk, staring at a contract he couldn't bring himself to sign. For the first time, the ink looked meaningless. His thoughts weren't on the deal, but on the woman who'd turned his house into something dangerously close to a home. He told himself it was temporary, just 6 months. But deep down, he already knew that what was growing between them wouldn't obey the clock, and as the rain began to fall softly outside, both of them lay awake, separated by walls, but connected by something far stronger, something neither of them had planned for, but both had started to need. The night of the charity auction arrived without warning, one of those events that Alexander had agreed to months ago, but had long since forgotten. It was hosted by his company, filled with the same people who had praised his success when it served them, and whispered about his downfall when it didn't. Amelia didn't want to go, but he needed her there. "Appearances," he said simply. She didn't argue. She'd learned that some battles with him weren't worth fighting, but others changed him without him even realizing. When she stepped out of her room in a pale silver dress, his voice caught before he could speak. It was modest, elegant, but the light turned it almost luminous. She wasn't dressed like someone trying to fit in. She was dressed like someone who belonged anywhere. He stared for a moment too long before managing. "You look appropriate." "Appropriate?" she repeated, smiling faintly. "That's a new compliment." He looked away, but the corner of his mouth betrayed a small smile. At the event, the flash of cameras was blinding. Every eye turned toward them as they entered, and for the first time she didn't shrink from it. She carried herself with quiet grace, her arm in his, her chin lifted. Reporters called their names. "Mr. and Mrs. Kane, over here." He leaned closer, his voice low. "Ignore them. Just look at me." She did. For the first time, the act didn't feel like acting. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung like constellations. People approached them with polite smiles, but every greeting carried an undertone of curiosity, a whisper of disbelief. She could feel the weight of their judgment. Yet Alexander's hand on her back stayed steady. Whenever she faltered, his touch guided her back into composure. It was subtle, protective, unspoken. Later, when a group of investors approached, she watched him slip into his public armor, the businessman, the strategist, the untouchable. But when he introduced her, there was a softness in his tone that no one else noticed. "My wife, Amelia." For a second, even she believed it. They danced that night, not planned, not for cameras. A slow song began, and without a word, he offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in it. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. "You don't dance," she said quietly. "I don't," he admitted, "but I can try." His movements were careful at first, measured like everything he did, but she moved closer, resting her hand against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his suit. The world around them faded, the noise, the lights, the whispers, and for the first time she saw the man who existed beneath the headlines. When the music ended, he didn't let go right away. "Alexander," she said softly, her voice trembling with something she didn't understand. "Why are you looking at me like that?" He wanted to tell her the truth, that he was terrified, that she was undoing every wall he had built, but he just whispered, "Because you make everything else disappear." Neither spoke after that. The night moved on, but something irreversible had happened. On the way home, the air between them was thick with the things neither dared to say. She stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold. He watched her reflection in the glass, wondering when a contract had turned into something that felt like fate. When they reached the mansion, she started to leave for her room, but his voice stopped her. "Amelia," she turned. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For standing beside me." Her voice softened. "It's part of the deal, remember?" He nodded, but they both knew it was no longer true. That night, neither of them slept. Amelia sat by her window, heart racing. She remembered the warmth of his hand, the sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. Across the hall, Alexander poured himself a drink he didn't touch. He stared at the piano, then at the door to her room. He had built a life of logic, where feelings were luxuries he couldn't afford. But now, logic was losing. The next morning, he called for his driver. He told himself it was business, but instead of going to the office, he went downtown, to the small cafe where she used to work. The place was quiet, the same smell of coffee and old wood still hanging in the air. He sat in her old corner booth, running his hand along the table's edge. The waitress recognized him immediately. "You're Amelia's husband," she said, surprised. He hesitated before answering. "Yes, I am." "She used to talk about this place all the time," the woman said with a smile. Said the regulars were her family. He looked around the cafe, seeing the life she'd lived before him, the simplicity, the peace, the authenticity he'd never known. It hit him then, sharp and deep. She wasn't the one who had stepped into his world. He had been pulled into hers. When he returned home, Amelia was waiting by the door, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "You disappeared without saying a word." "I went to the cafe," he said simply. Her expression softened instantly. "Why?" "To understand," he said quietly. "Why you still smile after everything? Why people still talk about you like you never left?" She looked at him for a long moment, unsure if she was angry or moved. "And what did you find out?" "That I don't deserve you," he said. Her breath caught. "Don't say that. It's true," he said. "You gave up your freedom to save yourself. and somehow you ended up saving me." Before she could reply, he stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want this to be fake anymore." She froze. The sound of her heartbeat filled the silence between them. "What are you saying?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was no mask, no calculation. "I'm saying I'm done pretending." And in that single moment, the lines between truth and illusion disappeared. The days after Alexander's confession carried an energy that neither of them knew how to navigate. The air in the house had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It wasn't distant. It was alive. They still spoke carefully, but their silences no longer built walls. They built understanding. The sound of her laughter lingered in the hallways. The rhythm of his footsteps softened, as if he no longer wanted to walk away from where she was. Yet the truth they now shared was as dangerous as it was beautiful. The contract still existed, signed and sealed. 6 months. No extensions, no emotions, no real marriage. But the lines between them had already dissolved, and the world outside had started to notice. One morning, while Amelia prepared breakfast in the kitchen, she found the newspaper spread across the counter. The front page showed a photo of her and Alexander at the gala. The headline read, "From Waitress to Wife, the Cinderella story everyone's talking about." She stared at it for a long time. The photo captured something she hadn't seen before, his gaze fixed entirely on her. There was warmth in his eyes, a softness that contradicted the version of him the world thought it knew. She ran her fingers across the image, her chest tightening. He walked in moments later, still adjusting his cufflinks. "You saw it," he said, his tone neutral. "They make it sound like a fairy tale," she said quietly. "But we both know it isn't." He paused, studying her expression. "Maybe it's becoming one?" She looked up sharply. "Don't say things you don't mean." His voice softened. "Who says I don't?" Her heart stuttered. She turned away, pretending to pour more coffee, but her hands trembled. "This was supposed to be temporary," she whispered. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath near her hair. "I know," he said. "But somewhere between pretending and surviving, I started wanting more than temporary." She turned then, meeting his eyes. There was no arrogance there now, no trace of the billionaire's armor, just a man standing bare in his own vulnerability. For a heartbeat, she forgot the contract, the money, the scandal. She forgot everything but him. But reality returned like a cruel reminder. "You don't fall in love with convenience, Alexander," she said softly. "You just confuse gratitude for love." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Then let me prove you wrong." Before she could respond, the sound of his phone cut through the moment. He stepped back, answering sharply. His expression shifted as he listened, professional, controlled again. When he hung up, the warmth between them was gone, replaced by the tension of his world. "What happened?" she asked. "My company," he said. "Someone's leaking internal files. There's a board meeting tonight." She frowned. "You think it's connected to you, to us?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet, but people will use anything they can against me." "Then don't go alone," she said. He looked at her, surprised. "You'd come." "I'm your wife," she said simply. "At least, that's what the world sees. Let me help you make them believe it." That night, they walked into the boardroom together. Every eye turned to them as the door closed. The men seated around the table, men who had once feared him, now watched with barely hidden suspicion. Alexander stood at the head of the table, calm but sharp. "You've all seen the articles," he began. "My personal life isn't your concern. What matters is that this company is stable. The leak ends tonight." One of the directors, a gray-haired man with too much confidence, smirked. "Forgive me, Alexander, but your personal distractions seem to be affecting your judgment. Marrying a waitress? The press calls it love, but we both know better." The room went silent. Amelia felt every eye on her. Before Alexander could respond, she stepped forward. "You're right," she said evenly. "I wasn't born into your world, but if judgment comes from integrity, then maybe that's why he chose me." The man blinked, taken aback. She continued, her voice steady. "You all hide behind titles and numbers. Alexander built this company with his hands, not his name, and whether or not you respect me doesn't change that truth." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with discomfort, and something like awe. Alexander watched her, his expression unreadable. But inside, something broke open, a pride he hadn't felt in years. She hadn't just defended him. She had stood beside him as if she belonged there. After the meeting, when they reached the car, he didn't speak. Neither did she. The air between them was charged, not with anger but with something far more dangerous, admiration turning into longing. When the car stopped in front of the mansion, he caught her hand before she could leave. "Amelia," he said quietly, "you didn't have to defend me." She met his eyes. "I know, but I wanted to." He stepped closer. "You have no idea what that means to me." She hesitated, her heartbeat trembling in her chest. "I think I do." For a moment, he almost kissed her. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not rejection, but fear. Fear of what it would mean if they crossed that line. She pulled her hand free, gently. "Don't ruin this, Alexander. Not tonight." He let her go, watching her disappear up the stairs. But the moment she was gone, he leaned against the car, closing his eyes. The weight of wanting her was unbearable. That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked through the dark halls, the sound of rain against the glass echoing his unrest. Finally, he stopped outside her room. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. Through the door, he could hear faint music, her music. It was a melody he'd never heard before, played softly on the piano she had started using weeks ago. It was hesitant, searching, full of emotion she couldn't voice. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed, listening. Each note felt like a confession, each pause like a heartbeat shared. He didn't know if she knew he was there, but in that quiet hour, listening through the wood and the rain, Alexander realized something undeniable. He wasn't pretending anymore. He loved her, and for the first time in his life, love didn't feel like weakness. It felt like truth. The next morning brought the kind of stillness that follows a storm, the calm that hides danger underneath. Amelia woke early and went downstairs, expecting to find Alexander already buried in work, but the study door was closed. Voices murmured inside. When she leaned closer, she heard him arguing. "I told you to handle this quietly," he said sharply. "I don't care what it costs. Shut it down before it reaches the media." The voice on the other end of the call was muffled, but tense. She caught fragments. Contract, exposure, one, board pressure. Her stomach tightened. The word contract hung in the air like a knife. She stepped back before he could see her and waited in the hallway until the door opened. He emerged a few moments later, his expression grim, his tie loosened, a man at war with too many ghosts. When his eyes met hers, the mask slipped briefly. "You heard," he said quietly. "Enough," she replied. "Someone knows about us, about the truth." He nodded. "They've been digging for weeks. I thought I could stop it before it went public." She crossed her arms, her pulse quickening. "What happens if it does?" His gaze darkened. "Then everything we've built, everything I've rebuilt, collapses." She shook her head. "Alexander, this was never supposed to be real to anyone but us. If people find out it started as a contract, if they find out," he interrupted, "you'll be the one they destroy, not me. The media will crucify you, the woman who married for money, the liar who played the part too well. Then tell them the truth," she said. "I can't." "Why?" His voice broke for the first time. "Because I don't know what's real anymore, Amelia." The silence between them was unbearable. He looked away, hands trembling slightly. "I thought I could control this. I thought I could control you, your place in all this the way I felt. But I can't." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to control it. You just have to be honest about it." Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. It was his assistant, Maya, holding an envelope with trembling hands. "They're printing it," she said quietly. "Every outlet. It's everywhere by morning." Amelia felt her knees weaken. Alexander took the envelope and tore it open. Inside was a dossier, photos, documents, the original marriage contract, even her father's debt records, proof that their union had started as a transaction. She reached for it, but he pulled it away. "Don't look. I need to," she said, her voice shaking. "This is my life too." He hesitated, then handed it to her. She flipped through the papers, her own signature staring back at her like a wound. "Who would do this?" she whispered. He exhaled slowly. "Dalton Reese, the man from the gala. He's been after my position for years. This, us, is his perfect weapon." Her voice was barely audible. "And what now?" He met her eyes, the answer already written in the guilt on his face. "We end it. Publicly." She blinked. "What?" "It's the only way to contain this," he said. "If I announce the separation before they do, I control the narrative. You get to walk away clean." She took a step back, shaking her head. "You think walking away from you would make me clean? You think I care about headlines?" "Amelia, please." "No," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't fix this with press statements and money. You can't fix us like you fix your company. He looked at her, helpless for the first time. I'm trying to protect you. Then stop protecting me like a problem, she said softly. I'm not your mistake, Alexander. The words cut through the air like thunder. He turned away, unable to look at her. I never said you were. You didn't have to. She stood there for a long time, watching the man who had built empires crumble under the weight of his own heart. Then, with quiet resolve, she said, If you want me gone, I'll go. But don't pretend it's for my safety. You're doing it because you're scared. He looked up, anger flashing behind his grief. You think I'm scared? I know you are, she said, because for the first time, you have something to lose that money can't replace. She walked past him and out the door. The sound of it closing echoed through the house like the final note of a song that had ended too soon. That night, he sat alone in the dark, the contract spread out on the table before him. Every word, every clause, every number was a reminder of how he had tried to control life and ended up losing the only thing that mattered. When Maya returned to collect the remaining papers, she stopped in the doorway. Are you really letting her go? He didn't look up. It's what she deserves. No, Maya said gently. It's what you think you deserve. He didn't reply. By morning, the headlines hit every screen. Alexander Kane's sham marriage exposed. His phone rang endlessly. Investors called, reporters camped outside the gates, and the board demanded statements. He faced it all with the same cold precision he had mastered years ago, but when he stood before the cameras to deliver his official response, something inside him broke. I made a mistake, he said. His voice didn't tremble, but his hands did. A mistake that began as a contract but became something I never expected. I will not deny the arrangement, but I will also not deny that somewhere along the way, I forgot it was an act. The crowd fell silent. Whatever you think of me, he continued, remember that love doesn't always begin clean. Sometimes it begins in desperation and grows into something worth losing everything for. When he stepped off the podium, flashes followed him, but he didn't care. He went home to an empty house. Her perfume lingered faintly in the hallway, her teacup still on the counter. For the first time, he realized what real silence sounded like, one without hope. In the weeks that followed, he lost deals, partners, money. The empire shrank, but he didn't fight it. He didn't care. He'd lived years building walls, and now, without her, those walls felt like a tomb. He didn't know where she had gone. He didn't try to find her. Not yet. Because he knew something deeper than loss. He had to become a man worthy of being found. 2 months passed, and with them went everything Alexander thought defined him. The board removed him as CEO. Stock prices plummeted. His name, once a symbol of power, became a cautionary tale whispered across newsrooms and dinner tables. Reporters called it poetic justice. The mighty had fallen, but for Alexander, none of it mattered. The empire he lost was nothing compared to the absence that haunted his house, the silence of a woman who had left without taking a single thing. He moved through his days on autopilot, stripped of title, schedule, and purpose. The staff had been dismissed. The mansion was quiet again, but not in the sterile way it once was. Now the silence hurt. Every room held a memory, her laughter in the kitchen, her voice echoing faintly from the piano, her soft footsteps in the hall. He'd walk past her room and stop, hand resting on the doorknob but never enter. It was on one of those nights, rain hitting the glass, whiskey untouched beside him, that he finally broke. He sat at the piano, staring at the keys. For weeks he hadn't played. He hadn't felt worthy of sound, but his fingers found the melody she once played through the walls, the one that had kept him awake the night he realized he loved her. The first notes were hesitant, unsteady, but then the music came alive. Grief poured through his hands, regret bled through every chord. It wasn't a love song, it was a confession. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was unbearable. He whispered into the dark, I'm sorry, Amelia. He didn't know that across the city, in a small apartment above a bakery, Amelia had been listening to that same melody in her mind every night since she left. Her new life was small, but peaceful. She worked quietly at a neighborhood cafe, the kind of place where no one cared about last names. The locals adored her. She smiled again, but the smile never reached her eyes. She still checked the news sometimes, only to see his name dragged through the mud, his image replaced by younger, hungrier faces. Every headline felt like a wound she couldn't close. One afternoon, an older woman came into the cafe, elegant but kind, her presence commanding without arrogance. She sat near the window, and when Amelia brought her tea, she said, You're even lovelier in person. Amelia froze. "Do I know you?" The woman smiled faintly. "Not yet. I'm Evelyn Kane, Alexander's mother." The tray trembled in Amelia's hands. She set it down slowly, her heart racing. He wouldn't," Evelyn said softly. "My son never talks about pain." They sat together for a long time, the air between them fragile but honest. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "He's not well, Amelia. I've never seen him like this. He's lost everything that made him proud, but I think what's truly broken him is losing what made him human." Amelia swallowed hard. "He made his choice." "Yes," Evelyn said gently, "but love doesn't always choose wisely the first time. Sometimes it needs to lose everything to understand what matters." Tears filled Amelia's eyes before she could stop them. "He lied. He made me part of his world just to save himself." "And yet," Evelyn said, "you stayed long enough to change him." Amelia looked down at her hands. "He'll move on. Men like him always do." Evelyn reached across the table, her touch warm and steady. "You don't know my son. When Alexander loves, it's not something he replaces. It's something he endures." When the older woman left, she handed Amelia a small envelope. "He didn't ask me to bring this," she said. "He doesn't know I came, but he wrote it weeks ago. I think he hoped you'd find it on your own someday." Amelia hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short letter, written in his sharp, disciplined handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that the man who made that contract died the day you walked into his life. I've been trying to learn how to live as the one you left behind. If love ever meant saving someone, then you saved me. I only wish I had been brave enough to do the same for you." No signature, no plea, just truth. By the time she finished reading, tears blurred the words. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her heart. For the first time since leaving, she didn't feel anger, just sorrow. For him, for her, for what they both lost trying to survive a world built on fear. That night, she walked by the river, the same kind of rain falling as the night they'd met. She looked up at the skyline, his tower no longer bearing his name, and whispered, "Maybe you did learn to love after all." Back in the mansion, Alexander sat at his desk, a single light illuminating the mess of papers he hadn't touched. The company was gone, the empire reduced to numbers on someone else's ledger. He should have felt relief, but all he felt was emptiness. He reached for the framed photo on his desk, their picture from the charity gala. The one where she had looked at him with trust he hadn't yet earned. He traced her face with his thumb. "I don't deserve to miss you," he murmured. When he set the photo down, something caught his eye. A small folded note tucked behind the frame. He pulled it out, confused. Her handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. "When I first met you, I thought you were everything I'd never understand. But I do now. You weren't cold. You were just waiting for someone to remind you that warmth still existed. I hope you find it again someday." No signature, just her scent still faint on the paper. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, and for the first time in months, he smiled. A small, broken smile, but real. The next morning, he packed a small bag, left the mansion and locked the door behind him. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to start somewhere small, somewhere honest, somewhere she might believe he belonged. When he drove away, the city didn't notice. The world didn't care, but in the rearview mirror, the storm clouds broke just enough for sunlight to pierce through, and in that fleeting light, Alexander Kane, once a billionaire, now just a man, finally began to feel human again. 6 months later, spring returned to the city. The streets glistened with the first real sunlight of the year, and the cold that had ruled the skyline began to retreat. In a small corner of downtown, hidden between a bookstore and a florist, a new cafe had opened quietly. It was nothing extravagant, no marble counters, no designer chairs, just warm light, old wood, and the smell of cinnamon and coffee. Its name, painted in gold across the window, read Second Chance. Behind the counter stood Amelia. Her hair was shorter now, her eyes brighter. She greeted every customer by name, smiled easily, and moved with the kind of peace that only comes from surviving something that should have broken you. Life was simpler, but it was hers. She still carried the memory of Alexander with her, sometimes as a scar, sometimes as a heartbeat, but she no longer ran from it. That morning, the bell above the door rang softly. She looked up, ready to greet the next customer, but her voice caught before she could speak. Alexander stood in the doorway. He looked different. No suit, no armor, his hair a little longer, his face marked by exhaustion and humility. He wore a dark jacket dusted with rain, and in his hands was a bouquet of white roses, simple, unwrapped, imperfect. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cafe filled with the hum of quiet conversation, but all Amelia could hear was her own heartbeat. "You found me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't looking for you," he said softly. "I was looking for myself, and somehow it led me here." She stood still behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have come." "Maybe not," he said, "but I couldn't stay away anymore." He set the flowers on the counter. "I lost everything, Amelia. The company, the money, the people who pretended to care. I thought it would destroy me, but it didn't. It just stripped everything down to what's real." "And what's real?" she asked, her tone cautious, but not cold. He looked at her, his eyes raw and steady. "You." She shook her head slowly, tears threatening to spill. "You can't just walk back into my life and say that." "I know," he said. "That's not what I'm asking for. I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because I finally understand what love is. And it isn't power or contracts or promises. It's showing up, even when you've lost everything, especially then." She turned away, gripping the counter to steady herself. "You hurt me, Alexander. You turned me into something I never wanted to be." "I know," he said again, "and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But if there's anything left between us, even if it's just forgiveness, I need you to know that I'm not that man anymore." The cafe went quiet. She looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the billionaire she once despised, nor the broken man she pitied, but someone in between, a man trying honestly to be better. She stepped out from behind the counter, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines that hadn't been there before. "You could have rebuilt everything," she said. "Why come back to me?" "Because what's the point of building an empire," he said, "if you have no one to share the silence with?" Her breath caught. He continued, voice trembling. "You taught me that love doesn't live in wealth or power. It lives in the small things, in laughter, in quiet mornings, in forgiveness. And if all you ever let me have again is this moment, standing here with you, it's enough." She stared at him, the weight of everything they'd been pressing against her chest. "You can't expect me to just forget," she whispered. "I don't want you to forget," he said. "I want you to remember, and still know that I'd do anything to be worthy of you now." The silence between them stretched. Then, slowly, she reached for the flowers. Her fingers brushed his, a spark of the old electricity flickering between them. "I don't know if I can love you again," she said quietly. He nodded, accepting it. "Then let me earn the chance to find out." She looked down at the roses. Soft, real, imperfect. "These are my favorite," she said. "I know," he replied. "You told me once, the night you said you didn't believe in forever." A faint smile touched her lips. "Maybe I was wrong." For the first time in months he smiled too, not the confident grin of the billionaire, but the genuine, vulnerable smile of a man who had finally learned humility. "Would you let me stay?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped back and motioned to the empty table by the window. "Coffee," he exhaled, relief and disbelief mingling in his voice. "Only if you make it." She nodded and turned toward the espresso machine, her hands steady now. "1 cup, that's all I'm promising." He sat down watching her work, the rhythm of her movements calm and sure. When she brought the cup to him, their fingers touched again. The moment was simple, quiet, but full of everything they'd both lost and finally found again. Neither spoke for a long time. The sunlight streamed through the window, painting them in gold. Finally, she said, "You look at peace." "I am," he said, "because I stopped trying to control the ending." She smiled softly. "Then maybe this isn't the end." He looked at her, his voice warm. "Maybe it's where love finally begins, without contracts, without promises, just truth." Outside, the rain started again, gentle, cleansing, familiar. Inside, they sat together, no longer pretending, no longer broken. Just two people who had finally learned that love, when it's real, doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be chosen. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in second chances.